Hey everybody, it's EK from EK Gorman Designs, and I'm coming in today with a card from my 2017 Halloween series. The card I'm playing with today is from Nooks. It's their Boo Crew. I've had this stamp set forever, and I just love these little Halloween critters. I went ahead in the beginning and drew out the ground line, just so I always knew where it was. I had plans. In the coloring, or at least in the deciding of how to color this card, I decided what's the hardest thing I could do on myself because I'm feeling absolutely incredibly crazy today. And that was color the card in black and white. Don't ask, I'm not exactly certain what happened here. But yes, I colored the entire card out in black and white. Here's the ironic thing. All those markers you see, that's all the grays I have. That's it. I didn't pull out my black. And I don't have any tonals, I only have 3 neutrals, and I only basically have the odds numbers of the cool and the warm grays. I have a couple even warms, but that's a whole long story. So I decided to color black and white with a lot of characters and a lot of layering using a limited palette of grays, and it worked. For everybody who thinks you need to own every gray Copic marker out there, you don't. If you have a good range from top to bottom, you can, in fact, color an entire black and white scene. For the easiest 2 color combinations for this card were my whites from the little ghost sheet cat and the blacks, which I used on the cape of the bunny and the hat of the owl. Those are the 2 easiest. I understand how to do my whites, and I understand how to do my blacks. It was everything in between. And I knew if I stuck to just cool grays, it would all start to just kind of start blending in together. And if I did it all in just warm grays, first of all, I'd never get a black, because my highest warm gray is a W7. So I knew from the beginning I was going to have to use both the warm and the cools, and my slight neutral palette. So I did. I just kind of thought out what a color would be. The trick for me, the real honest trick here, was I was pulling up pictures on my camera, my cell phone, and I'd find a color I liked, and then I would go into a filter and turn it to black and white and see what value the grays were in the black and white photo. So I did not color this card out first in color and then take a picture and then print it out in black. That's way too much time, too many steps, too much effort. No, what I just did was found a picture that had the color I would imagine the critter was, and then looked at it in grayscale, and then kind of picked up the values of those gray tones. My husband jokingly called this 50 Shades of Grey Halloween. I didn't think it was nearly as funny as he did, but he thought it was funny. And I'll give him that because he made a joke. No, so we're coloring in, and like I said, the whites are done, the blacks are done. Now I had to get to the mummy bandages, and I knew I wanted this kind of like off-white, dirty bandage color, but I didn't want to go warm with it. I probably, in the end, should have gone warm, but I didn't. I grabbed my 3 neutrals, and those are the only 3 neutrals I have, the 0, the 2, and the 4, and I colored them in. The key to making my bandages look nice and gnarly dirty was my colorless blender, which you'll see at the very end of me coloring the bandages. I will admit, with all the masking I did to create this card, I couldn't quite remember where the bandages were on the little bear. Like, because the dog's head's in the way, and the bandages are kind of difficult to figure out as it is in black and white when it's just the line work. So I actually had to pull out the stamp set. I think I left it off camera, but I had to pull a little stamp set out just to see where exactly the bandages were. So I am going to apologize now. I should have apologized several minutes ago, but I'm going to apologize thoroughly to you now. My camera setup was awful, and my giant mitt is in the way of this entire video. So heads up, if you think it gets better, it doesn't. Something about me was very off this day, and so I was coloring on the tip of my markers anyway, as opposed to using nice flicking motions from the side. But my mitt's in the way the entire time, so sorry. Didn't mean to, didn't realize it. You don't realize how bad your hand's in the way until you speed things up significantly. Here I am using that colorless blender, and I'm going over everything. You know how they talk about people, you don't want to get that modeling effect? I did. That's exactly what I wanted, because that modeling effect's what gave me that kind of dirty feel to those bandages. For the little doggy skirt, I imagine this was a really like warm orange red, really orange red. So I pulled out my warm markers and I found a picture with a nice red tone I liked, and I colored it in, coloring also the little wand in his mouth and his little crown on his head. The nice thing about using both the cools and the warms in this project was I got to keep the layers different. Not the images didn't blend in together with just these handful of colors. And you can really see how using a warm marker, a warm gray marker in this, helps pop the puppy out from behind the black cools, or the dark cools I've got standing behind him in the cape. I made a mistake here. I'll go ahead and like 100% own up to it. I always intended to grab my white gel pen and go back into like the little swirls of the puppy's skirt, and I completely forgot. This was a long card. This was a really heavily coated card. There's a couple things I always intended to do, and I frankly forgot to go back and do it. So I didn't fill back in the white of the little skirt, and it drives me insane. And I guess I could go do it now and take new pictures and then load them up, but that's not going to happen. I went ahead, kept trying to keep the wings soft. You'll see I go back in much later because I don't like how the wings come out. And again, just threw in one color for that stick of the wand. There was no need to blend. It's so tiny and there's so much happening. For the owl, I imagined he was a nice, warm, brown, light color, you know, owl color. Typical brown barn owl color. And so thus why the not the orange. There is no orange in this card whatsoever. Why the warm gray markers came out to color in the owl. The other reason I used warm grays was because he's standing next to that really dark cape and that really dark hat, and I wanted the owl to stand out despite the fact that he's surrounded by the darkest points on the card. And I think I was able to do that. I think I was able to make the owl stand on his own despite the fact the bunny has this really dark cape and the owl has this really dark hat. This is a fun set. If you haven't seen this set, this is like the perfect Halloween set, especially if you've got little kids. My, again, husband cracked up because he was like, here you've got cutesy critters and you put a giant demon behind them. At the end of the card, you see where I draw in and put in the giant, like, ghost, phantom creature behind everybody. But I thought it would be funny. You know, they're out trick-or-treating, and isn't that always the fear of kids when they go out trick-or-treating, is that somebody under a mask may not be who they think they are, or at least for my kids. Because I went with a warm red color on the puppy's skirt, I decided to find a cool brown. That's why he's getting the nice cool coloring. And I wanted to keep him light since his skirt was dark. I didn't want to fight the warmth of the skirt. I wish he'd gone a little lighter, in fact. I probably should have used a different combination, but I didn't want the dog to blend in with the white sheet. And this is where you go crazy on a gray scaled card, because you think you can manage everything, and in fact, well, you can. It takes some really creative thinking to color in grayscale. And you'll find in the end I didn't color in grayscale at all. I just colored the critters in grayscale because, yeah, I gave up on the grayscale at the end. It just got too hard, and I was afraid if I put a giant gray ghoul behind everybody, I would just destroy all the work and effort I'd done. And actually, in the end, I think the one pop of color behind all the critters really worked. Kind of reminded me of those old black and white photos where there's like this random off color in them, giving it this really, really creepy feel. Yeah, maybe. You'll see. You have to let me know. Let me know if did the ghoul's color work in the end, the phantom or the ghoul, depending on who you're talking to, we'll call them. And yes, I almost completely forgot to color in the puppy's butt, but I remembered in the end. I apologize for this video going so long and you getting to listen to me randomly ramble, but that's what it takes. The coloring, I will admit, kept getting, not my hand coloring, the coloring, my lighting, kept getting funky because I guess I was getting my head in the light source. For the bear, I wanted a really nice, warm, soft brown, so like a Winnie the Pooh brown. So that's where that came from. And his nose, of course, needed to go into a nice black. And I thought the juxtaposition of having a black cat with a white sheet in the end was going to work. And it made a nice irony for Halloween, you know, don't cross the path of a black cat. Even if he is wearing a white sheet. And then I forgot to color in the owl's face, so a little W, 0, 3, and 1 blended out was able to give me the coloring I wanted on him. And see, he pops out from the dark. By the way, my favorite section of colored in this whole card is right here. That band on the witch's hat came out perfect, exactly how I wanted it, and it almost came out metallic, which makes me cranky that everything else didn't come out that well. Like, why is it my favorite part of the entire card is a throwaway section of the card? To help the bunny stand out, I went back to my neutrals, the same neutral combination I used on the bandages, but this time I didn't blend it out with the colorless blender, and I used a much heavier hand. So you can see the difference between the bandages and the bunny. Same color combination, different usage. I knew I wanted the ground to be kind of special, so I got the cardstock really wet with some W2 marker, and then came back in with my W5 and just hand drew in stones, making it random and sporadic and like real stonework. And then just kind of added gray coloring to one side of everything. The trick to make stonework look really good is don't color it all in one warm or don't color it all in a gray or cool gray. Use a combination of both, because if you go look at actual stonework, even the palest of cobblestone has both warms and cools in it. So if you want to make really realistic looking cobblestone, use a combination of both warms and grays. I will admit my C3, which I used in the middle as my midtone, is very, very, very dry. I mean, ridiculously super dry. And it's one of those markers I keep forgetting is dry because I only use a touch of it. Yeah. For the grout, I went back in with that W2 and filled in the grout. And then to get the stonework to really have that stone feel, the colorless blender went in to make it, I don't know, the way stone kind of looks random. I can't draw a circle. I 100% cannot draw a circle, so I have a tendency of pulling out dies and tracing them. So yes, I drew a giant, giant moon tracing a die. And if you can't draw a circle, find one and trace it. There is no shame in tracing your circles. Here's my phantom or my ghoul coming in. And again, like I said, it's just very poorly hand-drawn in because that's the beauty of drawing a giant ghoul-like ghost phantom in the background. You don't need super drawing skills. You need to be able to make some random floating cloth. Actually, the coloring of him is more important than how he's drawn, because you just gotta shade it right. And I kind of wanted his face to peek through without his face peeking through, so I put the hood in and dropped in some eyes. I colored the moon in first, and I wanted it to glow in the night sky, so I went with a warm, hoping it would have a nice yellow tone. And then I remembered, you cannot erase pencil marks once you color over them with your Copic marker. So I stopped, I erased all my moon pencil marks, hoping that just the faint residue of it would be left behind, and it was. It was left enough that you couldn't really see it, but I could see it in the keeping my round moon shape in. I started with the W1, stopped, and pulled out the W2, and went ahead and flicked it in around the moon so it would have this nice, bold glow around it. I think the moon, well, the moon works until I start coloring the ghoul in, and then the moon disappears on you. And I had a solution. I'll show it in the end how I fixed the moon to make it look nice and strong. So yeah, use the W00, a W2, and then a W1 to make that moon. And I think it actually had that nice bright light feel to it that I wanted. And yes, it's a ridiculously large moon, but it's also a card in which a bunny is dressed as a vampire, so I figured a ridiculously large moon is acceptable. If it's not, I'm sorry I have offended you with my ridiculously large moon. But I wanted a nice backdrop, and I didn't want to go crazy building the backdrop. Now here's where I go nuts. I say no more grayscale, and you can tell I tested out some green colors. And threw in, this is my, what is it, YG91? Threw in my YG91. Now, what's sad is I could have just left the ghoul right here. I really honestly could have just left him without any blending and it would have worked. I didn't realize it until I went back and edited the video that it actually looked so cool with just the one color. I only used my darkest green in the hood to get his eyes in, and then I came in with this YG97 to drop in my low lights or my darks and create some form on the ghoul. Ghoul? Phantom? What should we prefer? Does anybody have a preference on what I call this thing? Let's go with ghoul. I'll probably say phantom 14 more times now. Yeah, it's been a long day. Ignore me. So I went in. I always forget the YG91 doesn't blend out the YG95 as much as I want it to. I really, really have to work the marker to get it to work out. And I dropped in just a little bit more eyes in the thing. Now, to really give the ghoul a great feeling of being transparent, I pulled out the colorless blender and made him use modeling to the best of its effect. I used it to actually give me the effect I want. Now, here's where we deal with the incredibly dry C3 marker. You want to create a cool sky and you have a nice, really, really dry marker, you can get some really cool effects. It's one of the only advantages to having a dry marker is making a cool background like this, because it drops in just a little bit of the dark color and then you're able to blend it out really nicely with your lighter tones. Yes, that was me thinking, what do I do now? How do I make the card look better? And the answer was colorless blender. I use a lot of colorless blender. I use it more than any other marker. Little dots in the background made a cool sky. And then I realized the horizon line needed to be grounded a little bit. And here's where I solved the problem of my moon. I used just the tiniest bit of YR31. And there's my card. Thank you for coming out and watching the 5th installment of my Halloween series. Like the video, subscribe, do all those things you need to do. There's more information on my blog. Thanks for watching. Bye.